Badass of the Week is produced by High Five Content.
There is another deafening crash as a mighty boulder smashes through the walls of Acre, showering the defenders with debris and dust. The battery of trebuchets and catapults fires ceaselessly, as it has for weeks, led by towering siege engines with names like the Bad Neighbor and God's Own Sling. It is July 1191. The summer heat on the outskirts of the Arabian desert is brutal and unrelenting, but the exhausted weapon crews return to their work and begin reloading their weapons. From his command tent, the already legendary King Richard the Lionheart stands in a full suit of plate mail armor, surrounded by loyal bodyguards and a cadre of Knights Templar. Their weapons and armor are bloody from fighting, their resolve that of iron. Nothing has ever stood against them in battle and lived to tell the tale. They have conquered Europe in a tide of glorious combat, and now, at the behest of the Pope himself, these knights have embarked on a great crusade to retake the Holy Land from the enemy and reinstate the Kingdom of Jerusalem, no matter the cost. But the enemy they now face is unlike any they encountered on the battlefields of Europe. For this is the Sultan Salah al-Din, the defender of the faith. He has risen through the ranks from a cavalry officer to the Sultan of all Syria and Egypt, leading massive armies against his enemies from Cairo to Damascus. Through a clever combination of diplomacy and military might, he has united his people into the largest coalition of Muslim forces assembled in centuries, and has used cleverness and resourcefulness, not just military strength, to outmaneuver and defeat the armies of the Crusader kingdoms time and time again. This conflict against the Lionheart will put his strength, his patience, and a lifetime of combat experience to the ultimate test. This will be the fight that will determine the fate of his homeland for centuries to come. And he knows he cannot fail. Hello, and welcome back to Badass of the Week. My name is Ben Thompson, and I am here with my longtime friend, Mike Primavera, who has been on the show a few times before. Mike, welcome back to the show. Thanks so much for being here.
It's great to be back. I love it here.
We are here, and we're doing our first episode of 2025. I'm recording it we're recording it on New Year's Day, and yeah, we have some really fun and exciting things coming up this year. I can't talk about a lot of it just yet, but there are some really exciting things happening in the Badass pipeline that are going to be very cool for next year. And yeah, Mike, it's the first one of the new year, so it's great to have you here to be the first episode, and just welcome back. Yeah,
I'm feeling strong. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling refreshed, and man, I'm ready to talk some history in the new year.
Yeah. We've had a little bit of a break. We took the last couple of weeks off on the show, and so I'm feeling the same way. Just psyched. We were talking about, I might have partied a little hard on New Year's Eve, and then we were kind of talking about that before the show, and that brought up an old story that I don't know if it's worth retelling, but it's kind of a funny shared story of us. So Mike was in my weekly Dungeons and Dragons group for many years, and there was a party we went to, and I always think it's Halloween or New Year's or some holiday, but it was just like the middle of July, right?
Yeah, we would constantly have these just random like costume parties that really were apropos of nothing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that was our friend Brian Servino, and he had this house in Capitol Hill, which is like the cool neighborhood of Seattle. And they would just have these weird parties. And for this one, it was like the anniversary of the house they were living in. The house they lived in used to be a convent, and they were having like a monks. Right. And it was the anniversary of the house they were living in. And it was a monks and nuns party, like a costume party. And you showed up in a nun costume with like a big clock around your neck. And
yes, I was the fly nun.
Yes, that's right. You were the fly nun. That's right. And for those of you who don't know, Mike is a big guy with a huge black beard. And he's dressed up in this very like Sister Act nun costume with this giant Flava Flav clock around your neck. I was trying to be funny with the costume, so I dressed up as a Shaolin monk, and I brought a pair of nunchucks that I had around my waist, or I had around my belt. And it was just this wild party, and it was like we were running out of time to buy more alcohol because it was like they were going to stop selling at 2 a.m. and it was like 1:45, and we decided we were going to go get more beer. This was many years ago. The way we got talking about this was he was asking, we were talking about our, the D&D group has continued since Mike left, and now we're all old guys that talk about parenting tips and woodworking and the best types of strollers to buy and car seats and stuff like that. And he's like, well, we're all the guys, and it's like, well, we're all old now, and it's not like it used to be 20 years ago. But yeah, so time was running out and we needed to get more beer for the party, and you and me volunteered to go, and we went outside and there was police waiting for us outside.
I believe they were on the stairs of the place next door breaking a party up, and we walked up on them. And,
yes, because it was a costume party next door. They were doing like cowboys and I don't know, cowboys and ranch girls or something, like cowboys and cowgirls. Yeah. Some other costume party also in the middle of July, apropos of nothing. And that was being really rowdy, and the police had come to break that up. And we walked out in these crazy costumes. And not knowing, having any idea what we were rolling up on, like, I remember we came down the stairs and there was a cop with his gun out he's like on the far side of the car with his like going over the car, pointing his weapon at us. And he's like, I'm walking and I'm holding the nunchucks together because they're clacking. I'm walking and like they're not designed, the nunchucks are clacking together while I'm walking, and I'm holding them together so that they don't make a lot of noise. And he's like, sir, take your hands off the nunchucks.
Might be the first ever person to say that.
Sir, take your hands off the nunchucks, pointing a gun at me. And I'm just like, dude, wait, I'm 20 yards from you. I don't know what I'm super drunk. I don't know what you think I'm going to do to you, man. But I am not going to deflect bullets with these things.
Yeah, I was like, all I have is a clock. Protect us, Ben.
You guys ready to see some stuff? I'm going to whip these out. Yeah, no,
there's a lot less of those situations since getting older and a little more mature, I guess.
Yeah. D&D game is different than the last time you were there. Things have changed a bit since.
The cops haven't pulled a gun on any of you in a while?
No, I have not had a weapon drawn on me in quite some time. The story does have a happy ending. We did get the beer.
Absolutely.
We did get the beer. No shots were fired.
Mission
no one was sent to
accomplished.
jail. It all worked out. But yeah, D&D is a lot more chill in your 40s than it was in your 20s. Anyway, welcome back to the show, Mike. Let's talk about Saladin.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right. So, like I said, we have some cool new stuff coming up this year, and we've got an old friend on the show, and we are going to talk about. I don't even know how to transition the nunchuck nun party to Saladin and the Third Crusade, but
another very lopsided battle.
There you go. Another group of guys, another group of religious fanatics rolling up on something that they weren't prepared to deal with.
100%.
I like it, Mike. That's why you're here. Okay. Well, let's take a super quick break, and when we get back, we are going to talk about Salah al-Din and the Third Crusade. We'll be right back. The story here begins with a man named Al-Malik al-Nasir Salah al-Din al-Musaffar Yusuf ibn Ayub ibn Shaidi. He's a guy whose name is mercifully shortened to Saladin because nobody really wants to write all of that stuff out, especially in the days of illuminated manuscripts where you had to transcribe all of that by hand.
That is a mouthful.
Yes. You see it generally as Salah al-Din. A lot of the other parts of that are kind of like, Christopher Columbus has 27 names, and a lot of those are honorifics given to him at various times in his life. And some of that is what's happening with Saladin. But I do feel like when you have 27 names, they do all need to be read aloud when introducing the character.
Absolutely.
Okay. So Salah al-Din, he is born in the 12th century, so the 1100s. He is a Kurd born in the Syrian town of Tovin. He is a nobleman. His uncle is tied in closely to a guy named Nur ad-Din, who is the Sultan of Syria. And Nur ad-Din is a guy that I will probably do an episode on at some point in the future. He's kind of the Muslim leader of the Second Crusade. The First Crusade happens in 1098 when, the Pope decides that Jerusalem should not be in Muslim hands. They send a huge force of Christian knights to Jerusalem. They carve a river of blood to Jerusalem, kill everybody there, take over, set up Christian kingdoms in Palestine or in the Holy Land, and
which is a crazy move.
Which is a crazy move, yes.
To basically not organize an army or anything, just be like, hey, you know what's cool? Or you know what's not cool? The Muslims being over in our Holy Land. So
just everybody
it would be really cool if you guys went there and just murdered all of them.
Right. Yeah. I mean, really, it's such an interesting thing. So the First Crusade is super interesting, and we'll do probably something on some First Crusade stuff in the future. But the Crusades in general, the Pope just kind of says, "Hey, get him," and then
you have a holy murder hall pass. All your sins are forgiven.
Yeah, you join this crusade. All your sins will be forgiven if you join this crusade. Go get these guys, and who he's talking to are the Christian kingdoms of Europe who hate each other. Mm-hmm. They all have been at war forever. England, France, Germany, all the German states, the Italian states, Spain, Portugal, they all hate each other. They've all been at war at various times. They're all trying to maneuver to conquer tiny little pieces of land from each other. But the Pope's like, you guys are all on the same team. Go get these guys. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they just don't. Sometimes they just say no. Sometimes they wait for one of their neighbors to send troops. Oh, the King of France is going to organize all his guys to go invade. Great. I'll just wait for them to leave, and then I'll attack France while they're gone.
It's just such a ridiculous, nobody's really in charge time.
No, exactly. Nobody's in charge. And when they show up, there's kings from all different kingdoms who all, like I said, hate each other and are probably in a lot of cases related to each other. And they show up and they get angry with each other because they don't want to take orders from one another. They fight. The fact that the First Crusade succeeded at anything was almost a miracle, because there ends up being, over a dozen crusades, and most of them are spectacular failures. But
there's no organization.
Right. And he's just like, you guys are all on the same team, go get him. And they're like, well, we actually hate each other a lot. And I'd rather watch the king of, I think it'll be funnier to watch the king of Germany die than to actually accomplish the goals of this crusade. And that's what happened. So the Crusaders, at this point in history, we're looking at, early 1100s, mid 1100s. The Crusaders have taken Jerusalem. They've taken Antioch and Acre. They've taken some cities in, that part of the world, the Holy Land. And they've established castles. They've established fiefdoms. There's, and for a lot of these guys, it's an option for, lower level knights who didn't inherit land to go take some land. So you've got these little kingdoms. The Second Crusade, the Crusaders try to expand a little bit, and this guy Nur ad-Din, he stops them. So the Second Crusade's a failure because Nur ad-Din defeats them. He is kind of descended from Turks, but he is in Syria. He's got this powerful army. He unites Islam in a way that the Christian knights never fully were able to do, right? Because, you know, a lot of times when we think about crusades, we think about like, oh, it's the French and the Spanish and the British and the Germans fighting against the Muslims. But the thing is, the Muslims were extremely divided as well, right? The Syrians don't necessarily get along with the Egyptians or the Algerians or the people from Yemen, right? And there's a lot of division there as well. And one of the things Nur ad-Din is very good at doing is he unites a lot of the people who are kind of in present day Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine. He unites these people together to be like, look, we got a big problem and it's on our back door now, right? It's here. We got to deal with this, right? It's a lot easier than saying, hey, go get on a boat and sail halfway across the world, the known world, to attack these guys in the desert. Yeah. With your heavy armor, these guys saying like, look, we can fight each other afterwards, but like, let's all unite to deal with this. And so
we got to get these smelly Christians out of here.
Exactly. And Saladin is a Kurd who doesn't necessarily get along with the Syrians, as we know from modern history. But but they were able to unite for this cause, and so Nur ad-Din, he defeats the Europeans during the Second Crusade, and he decides he needs to, but the Crusader kingdoms are still there. He wants to get these guys out of the Holy Land entirely. So he needs to kind of unite the Muslim countries. He's got a big problem because right now Islam is divided into two major factions, right? There's a lot more weird political stuff, and I'm not going to get into all of it because I really kind of want to get into Saladin and his life, and the Third Crusade is kind of what he's the most known for, and that's what I want to spend most of our time talking about. But there's this divide between two different styles of Islam. One is the Sunni Muslims, and one is Shia Muslims. It comes from a succession dispute that is kind of dates back to the 600s AD. But right now you have these two caliphates. You have the Fatimids and the Abbasids. And the Abbasids are based in Syria, and that's Nur ad-Din and his guys. And the Fatimids are based in Egypt. They are the Shia version, and they have their caliph, and they're very divided. Like they hate each other as much as the French and the Germans hate each other at this time period. They're not united. They need to unite. As far as Nur ad-Din says, they need to unite if they're going to fight the Christians off. And so his decision is to kind of attack Egypt and make them see his point of view so that he can be in charge.
See it from my way.
Yeah. Like we could all agree if you guys just surrender to me and we do what I want. Yeah. Then we can all agree.
Diplomacy.
Yes. Okay. So Saladin is his uncle is a high-ranking dude in Nur ad-Din's army, and Saladin, he's commanding this like badass like bodyguard cavalry unit known as the Burning Coals of Islam, which is just an awesome name for a military unit.
Like seriously, if you're gonna be on a badass list, that looks good on your resume.
Yes.
You're not getting on the badass list if you're in the lukewarm embers of Buddhism. Burning coals of Islam. That is awesome.
Okay, so Nur ad-Din and his guys, they start to move into Egypt. They start to move after these Abbasids, and there is, at some point we're kind of just glossing over the first first like 40 years of Saladin's life. But by like age 38, he has maneuvered himself from being a captain. You know, he's a nobleman, but he's like a company commander for these burning coals of Islam. He becomes friends with the Abbasid Caliph. He becomes he gets appointed vizier, and then after that, he kind of appoints himself Sultan of Egypt. Nur ad-Din, like he's kind of beginning to challenge Nur ad-Din. Nur ad-Din then dies, and Saladin and passes in. Yeah, he dies. I mean, he was old. He dies, and it passes his. He wants to transition to his son, who's like a little too young to rule, and Saladin is like, actually, maybe I should just take over everything. And at some point through military conquest and political machination, while he's fighting in Egypt, he's fighting in Syria, he's fighting in the Holy Land, he's fighting the Crusaders who are still trying to mess with him every step of the way, all along the way. He's winning all of these battles over and over and over again. He's becoming more prestigious for being a military leader, for being a great general, for being this charismatic guy. Everybody seems to like him. Everybody who meets him likes him across the board. Even like Christian Crusaders who meet him, most of them like him, which is really odd. Yeah,
this guy he really had an effect on people that in this time period, it's like, this is unheard of behavior.
Yeah. These guys go into these meetings wanting to kill him, right? Like thinking that he is the, basically the devil. And by the end of it, they're like, yeah, okay, it wasn't so bad. It's not so bad. We still have to fight him. Don't get me wrong. We still have to go to war with this guy, but
good guy. Okay.
Good guy. Yeah, isn't it? He's a worthy adversary, which is as good a compliment as you could get in 1175. And yeah, so what he ends up doing through various machinations, military and diplomatic and personal, is he is able to, by 1174, he's able to unite both of these, the Abbasids and the Fatimids. He's able to kind of unite the entire Muslim world under a Sunni caliphate. And this is the first time this has happened in over a century for Islam. And so, like I said, when we talk about, the Crusades, and it's kind of taking us a little while to get here, but when we talk about the Crusades, you think, oh, there's different Christian countries fighting the Muslims. But like the reason that is, who they're standing against is because Saladin puts the first 38 years of his life into forming that union, forming that alliance, which was not easy work. It was as hard as getting the French and Germans and British to agree on fighting together for a common thing. So
absolutely. And it's like the second he did that, all of a sudden they became like a much more powerful force than
yes.
Before it's like little scattered armies. Who cares?
Right. Once you become organized, now you've got problems, right? And okay, so one weird kind of outlier here that happens with him is he runs up against, he's kind of united the Muslim world, but he's pissed off one particular group of people known as the Hashashin, which are, we know them as the assassins. This is where the word assassin comes from. This is, it's been heavily popularized by Assassin's Creed, but like that's kind of Assassin's Creed's kind of based off of a real story of there was this group of guys. They were Shia Muslim and they were known as the Hashashin because the story goes, they would smoke hash and then assassinate people. But like smoking hash was like part of their like religious experience of preparing themselves to kill somebody.
My God,
that's why they're called Hashashin. Yeah.
Can't imagine being blazed out of my mind and then being like, all right, let's go kill somebody.
Couldn't you? Well, the Hashashin were like a known group, but they had these like heavily fortified mountain bases, that made it very difficult to get to them, to defeat them. And so they would they're basically like Muslim ninjas. Like they were a political force that would come kill you in your sleep if you didn't agree with them. And at some point, because Saladin is trying to institute, you got to pick one, right? And he was a Sunni Muslim, and he's like, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do this because we all need to unite, and that's what we're going to do. We're all be Sunni Muslim caliphate now. And the Hashashin weren't into that, so they tried to assassinate him 3 times. He survives all 3 attempts on his life. And then he decides he's going to get these guys, and he puts together literally his entire army and surrounds this mountain area where these guys live. And this is not like, I mean, this is still going to be like, fighting in Afghanistan. There's mountains, and these guys live in caves in the mountains and fortresses, heavily defended. Saladin arrays his entire army on the field outside these mountains, and then he's like, we should talk. And the assassins send their guys out to talk to his guys, and he's like, look, do we really want to do this? Or do we just want to assassinate these crusaders instead? Maybe we can work together. Maybe we can fight later and just assassinate Christians now and come back to this later. And they make an alliance, and it works, and they never try to kill him again.
They're like, we tried to kill you 3 times, so this deal seems pretty sweet.
This is actually a pretty good deal. Yeah, we're heavily outnumbered here, and we could just fight this out to the death over the course of a couple of years. But I think maybe we'll just see it from your point of view for a minute. So now Saladin has got the Muslim world united under a common cause, which is, let's get these crusaders out of here. Cool. Now the next step is to institute that. The crusaders are living in the crusader region right now is known as Outremer. This is kind of the crusader states in the Holy Land, which is Jerusalem, Antioch, Acre are the 3 like big fortresses, but there's a bunch of smaller castles and things along the way as well. And one of the guys who runs one of these crusader states is known as Reynaud of Chatillon. And I think it's pronounced in a much more French way than I was able to say it, but without Pat here, my French pronunciation is lacking severely.
Either way, it's a great name for a douchebag. It sounds like a really douchey name.
Do you know who I am? I'm Reynaud of Chatillon.
You're like, Jesus.
Oh, this guy, Ray. So Ray does not like the Muslims. Ray is he's a crusader. He fought against the Muslims. He lost a battle and was imprisoned for 16 years in the Sultan's prison system, which is kind of like, the beginning of Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Just
chained to a wall, big beard.
Yeah, exactly. He didn't forget it, and he has not forgiven it. And so when he finally gets freed, he gets ransomed for his freedom. He builds, he takes command of a mountain fortress known as Karak. And Karak is in a mountain high above this main road that links Cairo and Damascus. Damascus being the capital of Syria, and Cairo being the capital of Egypt. So these are two of the biggest cities, if not the 2 biggest cities in the Muslim world. Yeah. And Baghdad runs through Damascus, so all the major cities are on this road. And Reynaud of Chatillon, he has a castle overlooking the caravan road, and he's a dick.
Man, is he?
And he is not gonna he's not gonna get along with this stuff. So Saladin, like, one thing that we think of him as this kind of great military leader, but he tries to create treaties with the Crusader states, and he makes some deals with them. It's like, hey, look, I won't mess with you, you don't mess with me. We need these caravans to get through. Can you give us safe passage through this area? It's yours, and whatever, we'll pay whatever taxes. If we got to pay some toll or whatever to go through there, that's fine. But we need these caravans to keep going for trade and our economy to survive. Well, Reynaud says, no, I'm not doing that. We are going to ignore all Crusader treaties with the Muslim world. We are going to raid every Muslim caravan that comes through this area. If you ride your, baggage train past Karak, I'm going to ride down there with a bunch of knights kill everybody there and steal everything for myself. Then he builds, on top of that, he builds a pirate fleet, or he commissions a pirate fleet at least, that starts to raid the Red Sea and attack Muslim shipping through the Red Sea to try to basically just strangle, basically divide Cairo and Damascus so that there is no, now that they're united, they still can't trade with each other because he's going to destroy every boat or baggage train headed between those two areas. Then he starts making a bunch of claims about how his pirate marauders are going to burn Mecca and Medina to the ground. They're going to drag Muhammad's corpse from its tomb, do nasty things to it. And then he kidnaps Saladin's sister while she's traveling on the road past his castle, and he holds her for ransom.
I mean, this guy is on a serious villain trip. Like, he checks all the boxes. He has Evil Mountain Fortress, pirate fleet, swearing vengeance after prison failed to reform him. He kidnapped a damsel. He's going to probably do some kind of... He threatens to do probably skull sex to the Prophet Muhammad. I mean, this guy is crazy.
Yes. And so he's nuts. Yeah, and he's like, if you saw this in a movie, he would just be like, oh, come on. Like, what else? This guy's like... Give me a break, right? Like, nobody's this evil.
He painted a big skull on the side of the mountain.
Right? Yeah. Really, like Mount Doom, right? Or Death Mountain. Wasn't Death Mountain from Zelda? Isn't that the one that's a skull?
Yeah.
Right? And Saladin is like, writes him a letter and is like, hey, dude, you got to give me my sister back. And he writes back and he says, oh, why don't you send the prophet to come get her?
God, man.
Saladin is a guy who's pretty famous for being pretty, cool with people, right? This is not, like we said, like people who meet him like him. And here's the thing about Saladin that I kind of want to say up front, because we haven't talked much about the man, but he couldn't afford to finance his own funeral because he had given all of his money away to charity and to poor people and to hospitals and children and stuff like that. Like, and he was the Sultan of Egypt and Syria, right? And at a time where those were some of the wealthiest cities on earth. He is a pretty cool guy to people by most accounts. And but he has this side where if you tell him that you're gonna do bad things to his sister, that he's gonna punish you for it. He's not just a pushover, right? He's not gonna just totally let you walk over him. And so he decides that he needs to do something about this Reynald of Chatillon problem.
Which is fair. Totally fair.
Yes, absolutely. So he writes a letter to the King of Jerusalem. That's his next step. Letter writing campaign. I'm going to write King Guy of Jerusalem, or Guy. It's probably Guy, but I always read it as King Guy, and I like that. It just sounds funny to me. Okay, so he writes a letter to King Guy of Jerusalem, who is the leader of the Crusader states, right? The Crusader states are this, like we said, this nebulous thing. It's King Guy probably is French. Reynald is probably French, but these Crusader states are all different. Some of them are German.
None of them are self-sufficient running states. They're all funded from back home. They're chaos.
Right. And so Guy is kind of the guy in charge. Guy is the guy in charge of the Crusader states. And he tells Ray, hey, look, like, or Saladin writes a letter to Guy and is like, hey, Ray is being a huge pain in my ass. Like, can you do something about this? And Guy writes him back and says, no, I'm not going to do anything about it. Sorry.
Oops.
Saladin says, okay. This is how it's going to be now.
See you in a little bit.
Yeah, I'll see you. We can talk about this in person. Saladin declares a jihad, which is, a holy war against the enemies of Islam. Which, look, I think Ray is kind of an enemy of Islam. I think this guy qualifies.
Yeah, I mean, he's in the running for the enemy at this point, I think.
Yeah, he's kind of public enemy number one. So a jihad is declared against Ray, and warriors from Libya to Pakistan join the army of Saladin. And, you know, it is very synonymous to the Crusade, where the Pope is just like, hey, get him. Saladin, you know, and Saladin has the Caliph is good buddies with Saladin, because the Caliph's job is dependent on being buddies with Saladin. And so Saladin's like, hey, Caliph, we're going to call a jihad. We're going to get him. And the Caliph is like, yeah, get him. And then guys from all over are just like, we're going to get these guys. Let's get them. Cool. So they all join up in Saladin's army. He gets something like 7,000 guys. And he gets a huge army, but he goes forth with 7,000 into the Holy Land to fight the Crusaders. And they show up in the Holy Land, and there's like 7,000 of these guys, and they run across a pretty small group, 60 Knights Templar. And the Knights Templar, like, we know they're badass, right? Like, that's their reputation precedes them. They find this group of 7,000 Saladin's warriors. And Mike, what do you think these 60 Templars do when they face 7,000 Muslim warriors who are trespassing on Crusader property? Do you think they observe and report?
We have Jesus on our side. Let's go kill some Saracens.
I mean, what? Samson killed 100 guys with the jawbone of an ass. Like, each of us can kill 100 guys. Like, that's 6,000. I mean, it's close, I guess. It's still not 7,000.
So I just imagine like a small group of guys on top of a sand dune yelling at a giant arm, being like, "You pussies!" And they're like, what?
Yeah. They attacked. They charged. And they were all massacred except for 4 guys that lived.
Yeah.
That got captured. Yeah. It didn't work out for them. One Flemish Templar apparently, like, allegedly killed like a dozen enemies before he was slain. He's kind of the great hero of this battle, but you know, they all die except for these 4 guys who get ransomed back, and their heads are put on pikes. Like you said, this is the resume. This is the world in 1175. So these guys attack. They get massacred by an army that outnumbers them over 100 to 1. They're all killed. Their heads are put on stakes, and the stakes are stuck outside of the walls of Crusader fortresses.
As you should.
Yeah. Now the Crusaders are mad. Now we have a problem. So, okay. So now the Europeans in the Crusader states, they decide, oh, well, we got to teach these guys a lesson. We've got to establish our dominance again, right? We can't have, now that you know, the Muslim world has united and are killing Templars, we got to do something. We have to have a show of force. So King Guy, he says, like, all warriors in the Christian kingdoms, we need to form a huge force and attack Saladin's guys. And, you know, we're going to have the Battle of Armageddon. We're going to have the battle at the end of the world, and fight, you know, the enemy and have some great decisive battle. Okay. He assembles basically every warrior in the Crusader states, 1,200 knights. And those guys are all like mounted heavy armor knights, right? 18,000 infantry, swordsmen, spearmen, stuff like that. Nearly every fighting man in Outremer is assigned to this battle. It's the biggest European force that has ever been assembled in the Holy Land to this point. Saladin, you know, obviously sees this army forming. He forms his guys up, right? He's called this jihad. He's got his guys. He gets 20,000 guys, which is about equal numbers. The Christians have 19,200. He's got about 20,000. And with these ancient stuff, like, who knows what the numbers, it's plus or minus 10,000, right? There's going to be this big battle. They're like, all right, we're going to have this big fight. It's going to be the Battle of Armageddon. It's going to be the end of the world. It's going to decide the fate of the Holy Land forever. Okay. So Saladin's guys, if you can picture what an army of knights looks like, they've got the heavy armor, the sword, the shield, the very, D&D gear. And Saladin's guys, they have lighter armor, they have lighter horses, they have bow and arrow. Generally, they have, they're not going to hold up super well in hand to hand against the knights.
Which is one thing I've thought was hilarious about this whole crusade time is it's like they refused to adapt to the desert. Like they still had all their heavy stuff, their armor. It's like they didn't learn to adapt.
It's amazing,
and change
right?
things. They're just like, nah, we have Jesus. He gives us all the electrolytes we need. And I'm going to put all my armor on in July and I'm going to march out into the desert and fight.
Yeah.
Which is
it's
wild.
wild, right? Because, and when you talk about the Crusader states, like some of these knights, they start adopting Middle Eastern dress and customs when they're not in war. Like they start to dress more like people from the area. I guess because it's cooler. You're not like wearing heavy wool stuff in July. But like for the combat, and maybe in some ways it almost makes sense because, a knight in heavy armor, if you can get, like that Flemish Templar we're talking about, he takes out 12 guys before they finally get him, right? They are superior in hand to hand under perfect circumstances.
Yeah.
With one thing that Saladin is able to do that becomes the template for the Islamic world fighting these guys. Like, so when the Crusaders first landed, that was the strategy. The Muslims attacked them and they were defeated, right? They can't, the equipment is not the same, right? And so one thing that Saladin kind of sets the template for is like, we're not going to fight these guys like that. We're not just going to charge them and see who wins in hand to hand. He shoots arrows at these guys. And then when the knights charge on their big, heavy European horses and their big, heavy armor, he runs away. And then when they get tired and slow down, he shoots more arrows at them. And he starts to draw these guys out. And this is going to be the template for war in this region forever, until today. This is the strategy, right? Like,
absolutely,
fight these guys a little bit, draw them out further into the desert, attack them when they get tired, run away, fight a little bit more. Like, this is what you do with the stuff you have. You're on your home turf. You have the advantage because you know the terrain better. These guys are heavier armored. You can't fight them hand to hand. You've got to kind of draw them out and fight them with attrition. And that is what Saladin starts to do. He draws this huge Christian army out into the desert. And as he's drawing them farther and farther out, he's also sending his light horsemen around behind the back of the Crusader army to cut off their supply lines so they can't bring more food and water and ammunition and replacement people and all of that stuff. He's cutting off their supply train from behind. And at some point, he is able to draw this Crusader army 20 miles through the desert in the middle of the Syrian summer and surround them. And yeah, he's got the same number of guys as they do, but like,
those guys are so tired at this point.
So tired.
I heard some story about how, like, the night before he really attacked them, he burned smoke and just chanted all night. So they were all, like, exhausted all night. And he was just
keeping them awake.
Just keeping them awake with smoke. So the next day they were just, like, insane with
oh my
exhaustion.
gosh, yeah. That's wild. Yeah, and there were some stories that he was, like, poisoning wells so that they couldn't... Like, they wouldn't be able to drink out of the wells that they found because he was poisoning them. And, and at some point, these guys find themselves up on this hill called the Horns of Hattin, which is the site of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And they're all just beat. They're dehydrated. They're out in the summer. I mean, just imagine, like, trying to wear chainmail and walking through the freaking desert for 20 miles over the course of several days, fighting along the way with no replacement water. These guys are all toast. And
it's insane any of them made it.
Right. Yeah. And at that point, he attacks. And this is the Battle of the Horns of Hattin. This is the thing that he is the most famous for. He defeats the Christian armies. He kills the king, King Guy, is defeated. Reynald or Chatillon is killed. The Grand Masters of the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller are killed. The true cross, the cross that Jesus was crucified on, that's captured. And all of the Christian troops that are captured are either like ransomed back or sold into slavery, except for the Templars and Hospitallers, who are beheaded because they're too fanatical and they'll just, if he lets them go, they will just come back and they will hate him forever. And
they're not converting to Islam.
They're not converting to Islam. They're not going to go home. They're not going to be like, hey, all right, whatever, you won, I give up, you're the winner. And he, according to most stories, he personally executes Reynald of Chatillon with Saladin kills him with his own sword, which he promised he would do. When he wrote the letter to Reynald, and Reynald was like, hey, if you want your sister back, send the prophet. Saladin wrote him back after that and was like, I'm going to kill you with my own sword. I'm going to kill you with my own hand, which he does after the Battle of the Horns of Hattin.
Follows through.
He follows through, yeah. He doesn't make a threat that he's not prepared to follow up on. And, okay, so that was the biggest army the Christians had ever assembled in the Holy Land, and it is it's annihilated at the Battle of the Horns of Hattin. Saladin now attacks all of these forts in the Crusader states, which are now undefended because they stripped all of their garrisons for this battle. And Saladin takes Acre, he takes Beirut, Arsuf, Jaffa, he takes every other Christian city in the Middle East. Most of them fall without a fight because they have no defenders. He shows up and they just give up because they don't even want to suffer why get catapulted if you don't have to, if you already know the outcome of the battle. Once he completes this ring of capturing cities, he gets around Jerusalem. He attacks Jerusalem. The Crusaders do hold, like, everybody that they have left, they put in Jerusalem. He surrounds it. He hits it with catapults. He uses sappers to go underneath the walls, like bomb under the walls, which is where the word undermine comes from. I didn't know that until recently. Yeah, because he mined under the walls of the city. But that's like a medieval thing. That. Huh. Undermine, yeah, that's why you undermine somebody, because you dig a mine underneath the walls of their city.
It's so literal.
Cool, right? Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, he breaches Jerusalem through the same venue that the Crusaders did 88 years earlier than him. But rather than massacring the entire population, which is what the Crusaders did, he allows most people, or he doesn't massacre the population. He lets everybody live. And he even allows the Christians who live in the city to leave. He's like, get out, like, or you can purchase your freedom. You don't have to get out, but there was a kind of a rule in the Muslim world at this time. It was like, which you didn't have in Europe, but no. you could be Catholic in the Muslim world. You just had to pay a tax that Muslims didn't have to pay. There's a little charge for not being a Muslim, but we're okay with it. You can be Muslim. You can not be Muslim. That's fine.
But again, unheard of in this time to sack a city and not just kill everyone. Like that. Yeah,
he didn't kill everybody.
Completely unheard of.
Yeah, when the Christians moved in, they massacred all the Muslims and Jews they could find, which was basically everybody in the city. And Saladin did not massacre the population, which is like, I don't know. It's a low bar, I guess. He didn't massacre the population. Thumbs up.
What a guy.
What a great dude. Real stand-up guy. Remember that time I didn't slaughter everybody in the city?
I need a pat on the back every time I bring that up.
Yeah. So, I could have done it. I thought about it.
I still can't.
I still could. Yeah, I still have Jerusalem. I can still go do it. Okay, and that's that. Saladin is now the leader of a unified Muslim world, and he has defeated most of the Crusader states. There's a couple of holdouts, Antioch being a notable one, and he's taken Jerusalem back from the Crusaders who took it in 1098. So, what kind of reaction do you think that's going to get from Europe?
I think this is like in a video game where you beat the boss, but then the health bar fills up and the music starts playing again, and you're like, oh shit.
He's entering his second form.
You think you did it. Yeah, and that would be the Lionheart.
That would be the Lionheart. And that is what we're going to talk about after we take a really quick commercial break here. So in 1189, news arrives in Europe that Saladin has conquered Jerusalem and it is back in Muslim hands. And this doesn't sit well with the Christian leaders there, and particularly the English king, Richard the Lionheart, who we know as, we always kind of think of Patrick Stewart as being Richard Lionheart, but
every time.
But yeah, but he was actually French. So Richard Lionheart was born in France. His mother was Eleanor of Aquitaine, Aquitaine being a province in France. She was pretty badass. She led a group of knights in the Second Crusade, women knights in the Second Crusade. But Richard Lionheart, he's 33 years old. He is the Duke of the French province of Aquitaine. He probably went by Richard Coeur de Lion, which for me, I still think Patrick Stewart, because I think about Jean-Luc Picard.
Exactly. When you said that, I was like, no, it still works.
Yeah, it still totally works. But like, I'm still going to always picture him as Patrick Stewart. However, it's Jean-Luc Picard and not Robin Hood Men in Tights. So he's 33 years old when he gets news of this. He has spent the last 15 years of his life in constant warfare across the French and English countryside. He is a warrior. He's a knight. He is the kind of guy who, fought. He defeated his own dad in a succession dispute. His older brother had sided with his dad, so he defeated his older brother, and to the point where he'd put one of his older brother's military regiments, he had captured them after a battle, and he put out their eyes with red hot pokers. And then after that, he had them all drown in the Vienne River.
God damn.
Like he poked their eye. He defeated his older brother's army, poked out their eyes with red hot pokers, and then drowned them after they had taken their eyes. That's extra.
I mean, yeah. I don't want you to be able to see in hell.
Right, yeah. He was a humongous dude. He apparently carried a 20-pound battle axe or a gold-hilted two-handed sword that he claimed to be King Arthur's Excalibur. Yeah, so he swung a sword first and saved the questions for the Inquisition. He was a big, giant, massive, angry French-British Patrick Stewart meets Arnold Schwarzenegger, who just wanted to pummel all of his problems out of shape.
It's like his whole life just molded him for the Crusades.
Yes. And in 1189, they're like, hey, the Pope's like, get him. And he's just like, get who?
Foaming at the mouth.
So he forms an army of English, French, Saxon, Flemish, German, and Danish soldiers. They bore 216 warships from Pisa and Genoa in Italy, and he goes straight into the Holy Land to fight against Saladin. Okay, he's got some brief stopovers in Sicily, where his sister had been captured by the Sicilian king. I don't know why sister capturing keeps coming up in this story, but Richard had assembled this huge army, and while on board all these ships, and he's sailing on the way to Melissa, he's like, look, while we're on the way, we're gonna stop off in Sicily. This guy's got my sister. We're gonna kill this guy. We're gonna plunder
I like
his
that the
capital.
Italians are like his warm-up sets before he hits the crusade. He's like, I gotta loosen up my shoulders swinging this axe.
I gotta work out some kings. Yeah, so he stops in Sicily. He plunders Messalina. He overthrows the Sicilian king, sacks his town, frees his sister. He stops at Cyprus along the way, which is another island in the direct route to the Middle East from England. There was some pseudo emperor of Cyprus, so he kills that guy and claims Cyprus for England. Like you said, a warm-up set. They land at a fortress called Tyre. Tyre is one of these last few Antioch and Tyre are kind of the last two bastions of Crusader states. Everybody who was able to escape Saladin has come to Tyre. It's under siege by Saladin's forces when Richard arrives. He shows up and he just massacres everybody he can get his hands on. He smashes the Muslim army there and is just kind of kicking everybody's asses. He was supposed to meet up there with a German king known as Friedrich Barbarossa. Friedrich Barbarossa is also a badass king, but at this point in his career, he's like really old. He was the king of basically almost unified Germany, Holy Roman Emperor, and he was supposed to go by land. Richard was going to go by sea, and Barbarossa was going to go by land. But at some point along the way, and this is one of these Game of Thrones moments where like Friedrich Barbarossa was this giant German dude with this huge red beard. Barbarossa means red beard. He had this huge red beard. He wore black armor, and he was riding this humongous war horse, and he was going to go by land. And at some point along the way, he's thrown off his horse, and he lands face down in a pool of like 6 inches of water. But his armor is so heavy that he can't flip himself over like a turtle, and he drowns. And then his army is just like, the king's dead. Oh, let's just go home. Let's get out of here.
I don't want to do this.
I didn't want to be here. Do you want to be here? I don't want to be here. And then he goes home, and then the army disappears, and it never shows up. I was supposed to meet up with Richard, and it never does. And that's that. That's how that happens.
It's God's plan.
That's God's plan.
Oops.
Yeah, and great. So cool. Richard was also supposed to. He was kind of counting on the help of King Philip of France, but and Philip is there. Philip shows up at a different. He travels separately from Richard, but when Richard gets there, Philip gets malaria and decides like, I'm too sick. I got to go home. So he takes his French guys and goes home. And remember I said Richard was at war in France for like 15 years. Most of that was against Philip's father. And so Philip is like, I got a little bit of cough. I got to go home. I got to take my guys with me. So he takes his army back to France and then starts retaking all of these little castles that Richard had been taking over the last 15 years. That's what we said with the Crusaders. He's just like, actually, I got to go. You have your army here. You have fun running around fighting Saladin. It'll be great. I'm going to go back.
You stay out here. It'll be great for you. Don't come home for a while.
Yeah. And then by the time Richard eventually gets home, he'll realize that Philip has taken a lot of those towns and castles that Richard had spent most of his career trying to take from him. Okay, cool. All right, Richard Lionheart, he's serious. He's a giant, serious, angry dude. And he's decided that, like, all right, one thing that's nice about this is now I have nobody else that I need to share command with. I don't have to take orders from Barbarossa. I don't have to take orders from Philip of France. I'm in charge, and nobody's going to question that. Cool. So he attacks Acre, which is another formerly Catholic stronghold that is now in Muslim hands. And and this is going to be Richard, and Richard is badass. I like this guy. He's awesome. But he's a blunt instrument.
Straight line, swing the sword.
Yes. He gets on board a blockade running ship, which is just like a floating battering ram, and he just like I pictured dudes with oars and a sail, and he just rams right through like the barricade around Acre, crashes his ship through Acre's defenses. He breaks their blockade. He starts bringing in heavy artillery. He's got these big giant like catapults. They have names like the Evil Neighbor and God's Own Sling.
Awesome.
Yeah. They say he's besieging Acre, and at some point during the siege of Acre, he gets sick. Maybe malaria. Also, it might be scurvy. There's some people think it might be scurvy he got, which is just totally pirate of him. Just more bad. He's got a picture with an eye patch now. Like
yeah, exactly.
Like Mirror Universe, Jean-Luc Picard, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Jean-Luc Picard, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
That works.
According to the guy who wrote Richard the Lionheart's biography, and I don't mean like a modern writing of it, I mean the dude that was in the crusade with him, that was chronicling his life in an illuminated manuscript. He says, "Oh, Richard the Lionheart was so brave and so awesome that like even while he was laid up with malaria or scurvy, dying in his medical tent, we brought him a crossbow, and he would shoot the crossbow at the fort, laying down from his hospital bed. So we brought him a light crossbow, and he would shoot arrows or shoot crossbow bolts at the fort, and then." He would snipe people off the walls with his crossbow, laying down in his hospital bed, which is just
no
like the ultimate.
Off.
No days off. It's the ultimate, like, laying in bed playing Counter-Strike, right?
Yeah.
Because you're not feeling good. I'm sick, Mom. I'm staying home. I'm going to play Call of Duty today.
So I'm tired. Put the auto aim on.
Who is doing that for real? And, yeah. And so then he starts bombarding the fortress with, the Evil Neighbor. And it's granite boulders, and when they run out of granite boulders or they can't bring enough of them, they start launching dead horses at the walls. Just seems unnecessarily messed up, but like that's what he's launching dead horses. I guess it's cheaper than burying them.
I think about this a lot, but I have a fantasy that when you die, you get to go into like an editing room and watch clips from like any time in human history. And I would love to watch like a top 10 funniest, most insane things bored soldiers fired from a trebuchet or a catapult. Because it's like a guy who had like unsupervised working with a deep fryer. You're gonna put some stuff in there.
Yeah, there's nobody.
I just want to see what's gonna happen.
See what happens.
Shoot the horses. Fuck it.
Yeah. Okay, so at some point, Saladin's guys, they decide they've got to try to break out, right? They've got to they make an attack. So clearly we're not going to hold the city. We need to break out and try to reunite with Saladin and reform somewhere else. So these guys make an attack out. They try to break out, and Richard attacks them. And it's a big defeat for the Muslim army. And Richard and his knights, they defeat these guys. They take 2,700 prisoners of war. He lines them up outside the walls of Acre, and he has them all beheaded in full view of the defenders, one by one, beheaded in full view of the defenders of the city. Just to be like, this is what's happening. Not like surrender or this will happen to you. Just I'm doing this.
This is what's happening right now.
This is what's happening right now. And this is what is going to continue to happen. And this is what's going to happen to you when I enter the city, which will be soon.
Which you got to think at that point, Saladin's like, okay, this is a different type of dude. I've been fighting one kind of guy. This is something else.
Yeah, I think I preferred Guy and Ray to this. Actually,
this psycho, like a true psycho.
This guy is really off the deep end. Okay, so he does take Acre, and he massacres many of the defenders of the city. Then he starts to march south. His guys are carrying full plate mail, which is like, 90 pounds of gear through the blistering heat of the Middle East. He marches them south towards Saladin's army. Saladin starts to make these little hit-and-run attacks like we've seen, Horns of Hattin style, right? He's trying to draw them out. Richard doesn't really go for it, and he just keeps kind of marching along, doesn't really get drawn into any of these battles. And at some point, Saladin decides, Okay, they're not taking the bait. And for Richard, like, maybe he's being smart. Maybe he has heard the stories of Saladin and has some clever battle plan. Or maybe he's just like, must go to Jerusalem now. No distractions. So at some point, Richard's approaching the city of Jaffa, which is very critical to the network of fortresses surrounding Jerusalem. And Saladin is like, I got to fight him. I got to fight him here, and this is going to be my best bet. Like, I'm just going to attack him. Saladin chooses the battlefield. He has more troops. He has his own, he's fighting in his own area. He's got Richard kind of backed up against the ocean. He's got him mostly surrounded. On all paper, this is an easy win for Saladin. You outnumber the enemy, you surround him, you've got him kind of right where you want him. And so this is your best chance. And so he attacks. He attacks Richard from 3 sides, with the 4th side being the ocean. And Richard has been harassed the way that he did at Horns of Hattin, and this should be a win, and he really, at this point, Saladin really learns that like nobody can get pissed like Richard Lionheart. Yeah. And he's supposed to he raised his army in front of Richard's army, and he sends his guys around the back like he had done before to break the supply lines, and they start to attack the back part of Richard's army, which is the Knights Hospitaller, which are religious warrior monks, right? And who know that Saladin will take no prisoners from their order. He has executed Knights Hospitaller every time he's found them, because they do hate him forever, and they will hate him forever. But now they've got more. These guys are basically space marines at this point, right? Like they're just, I will kill you or I will die, and that's it.
Yeah.
And Richard orders them actually to hold their positions, but at some point they decide they can't. And on the 7th or 8th feint attack by the Saracens, by Saladin's guys, the Hospitallers break ranks and charge ahead. And when that starts to happen, all of the knights in Richard's army are just like, let's go! And they all just charge in every direction, all at the same time, and they just kill everything that they can get their hands on. And it is not close. It is a complete rout. And Saladin's guys are like trampled to death by their own guys while they're trying to run away. Like, it's a humongous defeat. The Saladin's army loses wagons. They lose a lot of their supplies. They lose tons of guys. The Crusaders lose like hardly anybody, a couple hundred warriors, and that's it. And then Jaffa falls almost immediately. And this is like a crushing defeat for Saladin and his guys. And it opens the door to an attack on Jerusalem. Okay, now this is the part you were talking about, the boss battle where you're like, we entered the final form. This is the part where you've paused the game and all your like 3 of your 4 guys are dead, and like your other guy's at like 12 hit points, and you're like, maybe he'll miss this next attack, but you're like going through your inventory being like, I got cabbage, I can eat that, like to give me some help. Yeah. What are all the weird potions I've been saving all game to try to like use here? Like what weird stuff do I have in my inventory? In a D&D game, you're like flipping over your character sheet being like, is there anything? Any trait I have? Is there some weird thing that I can do? Like, what does dark vision do exactly?
Yeah, anything.
Right. So Saladin's got to do something, and he's getting crushed. Richard the Lionheart is just a warhammer, just pounding away. Okay, what are we gonna do? How are we gonna stop? These guys are 10 miles from Jerusalem, and I can't let them get there. Okay, so what he does is he kind of gets back to basics. He fortifies Jerusalem, and he starts launching more of these hit and run attacks. He starts poisoning wells. He starts drawing these guys out. He starts skirmishing them. He starts shooting arrows at them. He's going back to what he was doing before. It hadn't worked at Jaffa. They'd crushed him. But he keeps going back. He's like, let's do it. And he starts drawing them out, trying to dehydrate them, trying to cut off their water supply, all of this stuff. And, this is like almost anticlimactic. But at some point, by the time Richard's guys get that last 10 miles to Jerusalem, they're all just tired. They're all just worn out and tired because they've just been charging through the desert. Just get tired and they can't do it. I mean,
it's a perfect strategy. Yeah, it's not sexy and cool, but it's like you can't beat that if you're just slow and steady.
Yeah. He just launches these little raids, and these little victories, these little skirmishes keep pissing him off, keep causing trouble, make him angry, and he will like charge out in one direction and then run away. And, you know, over the course of those 10 miles through the desert, the dudes in the armor, they just get tired. And that's it. That's what happens. Like Richard the Lionheart's army arrives at the gates of Jerusalem, but he has no supplies. He has no people. Everybody's tired, and they just go home. And this, if we're going to continue this Final Fantasy analogy here, like he just finds some potion that's like, oh, actually I have this thing that'll just, make me invincible for 12 seconds. And then I can just get the last 2 hits and then kill the guy. It's kind of what happens here. And that's it. Richard the Lionheart withdraws back to Acre, which he has retaken. He has to fight his way out of there, which he does in like pretty badass way. Like, there's stories of like him fighting, like him and his knights are like fighting their way to the coast, and they're being attacked as they start to fall back. Saladin's guys fall on them, and Richard Lionheart is awesome. And like there's stories of him like he takes the leg armor off of his plate armor, and so he can go through he's fighting in the water, and he doesn't want to it's like, I don't need it. I got the water. So he takes his leg armor off, and he's got so many arrows sticking out of him that he looks like a porcupine. Right. And,
I love that.
They're fighting at night, and he's got all these Templars. Like he decides he loves the Templars. Of course he does, right? And they're all fight around him, and there's these badass stories of him fighting battles after battles after battles and doing all this heroic stuff. But at some point, like he just can't take. Maybe if he had Friedrich Barbarossa's guys, maybe if he had Philip's guys, he doesn't. He can't do it. And also like Richard's getting word that King John back home of Robin Hood fame has taken over his throne in England and is doing all this bad stuff. Philip of France is taking places, taking towns and villages from him in France. I got to get home. Like my army can't take Jerusalem, and I got to get back. Right.
Go kill some people in some nicer weather.
Yeah, I'm done with this. I'm out of here. This sucks. He lost something like 90% of his guys to Saladin. He'd been there for 15 months. A lot of his guys had died of disease or had just deserted because they were like, this sucks. And they went home, they left. He leaves, and on his way home, he gets shipwrecked, and he gets captured by the new Holy Roman Emperor, who was the guy who succeeded Friedrich Barbarossa. He becomes a prisoner of the Holy Roman Empire. They throw him in jail, and he stays in jail for a while there on his way home before he finally comes back to England. And we haven't really talked about Saladin since Richard showed up, because Richard's such an interesting character. But this is Saladin, man. Like he wins the Third Crusade through this attrition, and doing so makes him like one of the greatest heroes in the history of Muslim military, victories. He had come from kind of very little. He was the nephew of a guy who was close to Nur ad-Din. He became like a competent like cavalry commander, and then he became this, great military leader who was able to, with charisma and military might, unite all of the Muslim world. Then he's dealing with this Reynald guy. He's dealing with these Crusader kingdoms. He takes them, recaptures Jerusalem for Islam, and then holds it off against this dude Richard, who we've been kind of talking badassly about, and he deservedly so. But like Richard, as badass as he was, he did not defeat Saladin. He lost. He runs home. He escapes he limps out of there with 10% of his army, because Saladin has driven him away, has defeated him repeatedly, never in a single battle. There's no horns of Hatton for Richard the Lionheart. He just gets worn down by attrition over and over and over again. And he, when he becomes the ruler of this area, Jerusalem is never, for the next 1,000 years, it's going to be, or next several hundred years, it's going to be in the hands of the caliphate. The Christians never retake it. The Catholics never retake it during this time period. No matter how many more crusades they call on it, the third was the one that got the closest after the first, and nothing else really gets close. In victory, he becomes like pretty well respected also. So instead of, like we said, oh, he didn't slaughter the city, that's pretty cool. But he also, moving forward, he grants rights to, like, if you are a Catholic warrior, if you're one of Richard's guys who deserted and you want to come visit Jerusalem to go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, you can. Like, he's not, that's like and that's another thing, it's a low bar, right? But this is also the 12th century Middle East,
exactly.
like holy war, literally holy wars.
He does
right?
not have to do this.
Right, he doesn't have to do this. He could have you executed on site. But yeah, if you wanted to come visit Jerusalem, you can, and you can go to your holy sites and you can practice your religion there. Like I said, low bar, but this is like also 100 years before the Spanish Inquisition, so like it's not that. That's where we're at in history right now. And there's a story that when Richard was wounded in battle, Saladin sent his personal physician to go take care of Richard. And there was one time when like Richard's horse was shot out from under him by an arrow, and Saladin was like, let me get you a new one. You need a good horse. Like I'll give you one of my best horses. You can ride that one instead.
Good guy.
Yeah, just what a guy, right?
Wasn't he also mentioned in Dante's Inferno as
Yes. Yeah, so like I said, he ends up, he becomes, they call him the defender of the faith. They start giving him all those nicknames that we've talked about. He becomes like one of the greatest heroes in the Muslim world. And to this day is probably the greatest, best known, hero of, military history of Islam. And, he is, interestingly, like you said, he's known for like being chivalrous and righteous, even though he was, not Catholic, which was the biggest sin you could be in.
And most of the time, even if you were a good person, they were going to paint you as a villain anyway, just because they would write their history, and not him, though. Yeah.
Yeah, he's listed, like you said, in the Inferno, he's listed among the virtuous pagan souls in purgatory, which is as good as you can get if you're in Catholic world. You get purgatory, you don't get to heaven, but you can get to purgatory, that's fine.
It's pretty good.
That's not bad. His coat of arms is on, he had an eagle. His standard was an eagle. And so his eagle is the eagle that you see on the flag of Egypt today.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and also on the flag of Kurdistan. Kurdistan is not a country that is internationally recognized, but the Kurds want their own country. And if they end up getting it, the flag that they will have Saladin's eagle on it, because that's awesome. Probably the most well-known Kurd in human history. He's written about favorably by, of all people, Richard the Lionheart writes about him as being like a worthy adversary and a noble person that he, it's like, oh, thanks for the horse, as
couldn't kill him, writes, good guy.
yeah. I probably still would have put his head on a spike if I could have got my hands on him, but at least he didn't slaughter everybody in Jerusalem. I can respect him for that. I'd have done it.
Yeah.
But yeah, many of the notable authors of the medieval era and later write about him, like very Catholic people who did not have a lot of tolerance for people who were not Catholic write about Saladin as being like a cool guy and a nice dude and a worthy adversary. And that's kind of how history remembers him. You were on here for Hannibal, which is also another guy that's known as the great enemy of the people who wrote the history that is still remembered fondly. And that's where Saladin falls in a lot of like Western history as well. Like he's kind of listed as a worthy adversary. But to his own people, he's the greatest hero they've ever had. Right. And I don't think there's anybody out there who's going to kind of debate the badassitude of Saladin, but it is still fun to tell the story anyway.
Like a true neutral, good badass.
Yeah. He would have dealt with that nunchuck situation in a more reasonable way, I feel like.
Those cops would have been like, man, those nuns were so cool.
Those nuns were awesome. Oh Oh, all right. Mike, it was awesome having you on the show. Thanks so much for being here. I know I've kept you a little longer than I promised I would, but this was really fun. I'm happy to have you here.
Awesome.
Happy New Year. And
Happy New Year.
And, yes, and let's try to do this again in 2025.
Absolutely. Thanks, man.
All right. So long, guys. Thank you so much for listening, and stay badass.
Badass of the Week is produced by High Five Content. Executive producers are me, Ben Thompson, Dr. Patricia Larish, and Andrew Jacobs. Writing is by me and Pat. Story editing by Ian Jacobs. Mixing and music and sound design by Jude Brewer. Special thanks to Noel Brown at iHeartRadio. Badass of the Week is based on my website, badassoftheweek.com, where you can read all sorts of stories about other badasses. If you want to reach out with questions or ideas, you can email us at badasspodcast@badassoftheweek.com. If you like this podcast, please subscribe, follow, listen, and tell your friends and tell your enemies. And please leave us a rating. We'll be back next week with another one.